When I am working with the U process as a tool, a journey of supporting a team, an organization, an individual to go through their own transformation, I used to take it for granted. I never gave it much thought. This was a framework that had been shared with me, and I could easily navigate through the 3 core movements, the 5 core movements. But it was only in 2018 that my attention was drawn to the dot at the bottom of the U, and why the 2 arms, the left and the right arms of the U, are not joined. It was during the celebration of the 100th birthday of Nelson Mandela, and for some reason I got invited, of all places that celebrated big time Mandela's 100th birthday. It was Lisbon. I guess I was invited there because of a little book I had written some time back on Nelson Mandela's leadership. And soon after arriving in Lisbon, I became interested in the much more higher profile person who was in our midst. This was someone who knew Nelson Mandela as a young Scottish journalist. So his name is John Carlin. John Carlin is the author of the book on which the movie Invictus is based. And he was in the audience when I was sharing the U process with some of the participants of the celebratory workshop that had been held. And during tea time, John walked to me and he said, "I know someone who was leading in the manner you were describing. I know someone who operated from that dot which you left unlinked to the left and the right arm of the U shape." At that point, I became extremely interested. I asked John, "Who is that one? And kindly tell me any story that you see connected to that." John said, "It is Nelson Mandela. As you were explaining the U-shape journey and what happens at the bottom of the U, where the dot is separate, it made all sense to me why from time to time he went there and came out very different." And then John told me this story. He said he was in the room with a few other people who were the leaders of the African National Congress when the sad news was broken to Nelson Mandela that Chris Hani, his political son, had been murdered. John said, upon receiving that sad news, Mandela went like a sphinx. For some time, he was like a statue. It was like he was not breathing. And those of us that were in the room, John said, didn't know what to do, whether to shake him because he might have suffered shock, or to leave him because we didn't know what was going on. He said, we chose to leave him. Maybe we were also paralyzed by the experience. When next Mandela spoke, John said, he asked that he addressed the nation of South Africa through radio and television. And that is when he gave that 7-minute speech, which saved South Africa from the brink of self-destruction. John concluded, at that point, South Africa was willing to go to war, to bitter ends. The line had been crossed through Chris Hani death. But it was that 7-minute speech that immediately gave deeper meaning to what was going on to everyone in South Africa. And John further said, it wasn't only once or twice that he witnessed Nelson Mandela go somewhere. Something happens. Ordinary person tends to respond immediately. He would disappear, at least in response form. And each time he came back, it was like he had gone somewhere to fish something completely different. It was like he had gone to connect himself with a different sense of knowing. And the course changed from there on. So in that sense then, it was John Carlin and the story of Nelson Mandela that deepened my understanding of the bottom of the U. When we let go, and then there is nothing. And then something begins to come through on the other side. And quite often very different from that which we entered the nothing space with. And then it emerges anew. And in a way, that is the essence of presencing, the capacity to connect with something much more than ourselves. And that is also the place from which we harvest the energy it takes to begin the experimentation of the new. Because you could imagine in the case of Nelson Mandela, the country was ready to fight to bitter ends. And he was coming in as a contradiction. It was easier for him to say, let us fight fire with fire. It was easier. But to say, stop. Here is our way of responding to this.